Hello, friends. Welcome back to How to Talk to Weirdos, where we discuss communication with people who are different than you. And since we're all unique, that's pretty much everyone. When someone has a different style of communication, they can seem like a weirdo. And if they seem that way to you, you probably seem that way to them. As I like to say, everyone's kind of a weirdo. We're going to talk about some of the assumptions that we make and other pitfalls of communication so that we can all improve. There's a lot to cover, so let's get started. Hello and welcome back to How to Talk to Weirdos. You are going to love today's guest. It is Anna Xavier. Anna founded ThePodcastSpace, which is an online podcast consulting agency. She helps people to make a greater positive impact on their audience and how to become better hosts. So I'm hoping that I do all right today. She's helped professionals all over the world, which she can do because she speaks 4 languages. And even though English is not her first language, she herself has a popular and quite excellent podcast, which I've been listening to and enjoying, and it's called ThePodcastSpace. Anna, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Jeremy. I'm very excited to be here. I'm just thrilled that we get to talk about some topics that are my favorites. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. We're excited. And one thing that was kind of fun is I was reading through your bio, and you have an asterisk explaining how to pronounce your name, which I think is fun. So Anna, and you just said standard, international, and then Xavier, like Xavier from X-Men.
Yes. You know what's funny is that everyone, because the Portuguese version of Xavier is actually Xavier. So it's the sh sound. And I'm like, I don't assume anyone's going to know how to pronounce that. But the Xavier is like, Savior. People just, for some reason, I'm like, have you ever watched X-Men? And people go, yes. And they're like, oh, Professor Xavier. Yes, I got it. Suddenly, for the past 2 years, people give me the stare like, no, never heard about that. And which is a dagger to my heart. I'm like, I lost my reference now. What can I say?
They need to bring back a sequel so that more people will watch it again.
Yeah, so it becomes mainstream knowledge for sure. Yes, that's a good tip. I should email Marvel or whatever. Who owns that? Is it DC? I don't know.
It's not DC, I can tell you that.
Got it.
They're the other guys, the bad guys. But it's never once occurred to me that I would need to explain how to pronounce my name, and I think most Americans would never think about that. It's generally just assumed that it's easy.
It's funny that you're saying that, but I feel that I'm originally from Portugal. I lived in London, and I appreciate the American just standard person who is always like, hey, are you Anna? Are you Anna? What is it? And I'm like, in Portugal, nobody will ask you how to pronounce your name. In the UK, I never had that happen as well. So even though Americans don't think about that, they think about others for sure, which is super nice. I feel it's super, super welcoming and really inclusive. So I have no complaints on that side. Yeah.
Excellent. So you grew up in Portugal. Can you tell us a little bit about your background there and how you got here and where you are now?
Yes. So long story short, because normally I always go through the very long, exciting trip of taking you on a journey with me through time. So I am Portuguese. I was born in Portugal, studied journalism there. That's actually where I did my first podcast while I was studying journalism. And it was really interesting because it was one of those degrees that meshed up PR, multimedia, and journalism. So basically everything that podcasting is today, I already had the skill set back then, which, it's awesome. And then I worked in radio in Portugal. My best friend moved to London. She goes, I'm going to go study there. Why don't we go together? And I was like, sure, let's go. The land of the BBC. And then did a lot of online radio there, which is kind of a combination of radio stations with podcasts. Learned a ton, did a lot of really cool projects, did work as well in digital marketing. And so I was like, this is really interesting to just talk to anyone all around the world and get your message across. And then I met my husband. He moved here to the US, and I started working in live streaming here in the US. So basically, I worked in a studio, people who would be, not media trained. So people who were regular small business owners would come in and we would be the professionals making them look good and sound good. but it was very much about pushing buttons and just doing the camera switching, the setting up the microphones and all the things. And while I kind of enjoy that, it was fun, I really felt like my heart was going back to, I'm very mission driven. So basically I always want to support people who want to make the world a better place or who are really passionate about educating their community. So I, in 2020, decided to launch the podcast space to truly support podcasters, not only with the inception of their idea, but also to make sure that they were marketing that podcast idea, that they are actually using the podcast as a business tool versus just, content that goes out into the internet. People listen to it like, cool, like, thank you for the time together. And then they, go and do another thing. So helping small business owners really understand the power of these microphones and the legacy of content that they're leaving their community is just something that I've just been so passionate about.
So you not only want to make the world a better place, you want to help other people make the world a better place. I like it.
Yes, exactly. I'm like the shepherd. I'm like, let's go this way, people.
You just got yourself a new nickname, the Shepherd.
Yes.
So you did your first podcast in Portugal, I assume in Portuguese.
Correct. Yes.
And then did you already speak English?
Yeah, so in Portugal, we are one of those countries that we don't dub anything, so everything has subtitles. So you learn English at school, and you are consuming television and movies and everything, and basically everything has subtitles. So you're listening to the language, so you're getting really used to listening to it. But to be honest, when I moved to London, I was not fluent at all. I would do very, very well with international people because you're just using kind of generic generic communication. So you're not really going in depth. Everybody's level is kind of like about the same. But even though I was a good student when I moved to London, I was like, this is absolutely not. The first 6 months was so hard because I started working in just a shop in Oxford Street, which is one of the most just busy streets in London, and it's one of the most touristic places. So you would hear a lot of British people and just people from all over the world. So a lot of different accents, and I had to learn really fast. But those 6 months were like, oh girl, you thought you knew English. This is not. But yeah, that was one of those really interesting things. Joining a lot of those online radio stations with British people. Some of my coworkers and people who was doing those shows, they were actually either working for the BBC or they were freelance journalists, and they were British. So that really helped me improve my English really fast, but just within, the Queen's English or proper English, should you say. So that helped me a ton, but it was difficult in the beginning.
So when you were there, did you pick up a British accent?
Oh, yes. I absolutely had a really British accent. And I loved my British accent. I really enjoyed it because I pick up accents really quickly and really easily. But then I moved to Texas. And I remember vividly, I was at Home Depot and I was asking for some pillows. And the lady stared at me and she just goes, "Some what?" And then this happened 3 times. And, we in Portugal, I grew up listening to more American accents. So basically this is easier for me. So I was like, I sniffed once and I was, okay, gotta drop the British accent. That's it. That's my signal. So then I just have these accents that you're listening to right now. Very devastated.
So how difficult was that to make that switch?
Oh, it's fine. It's just literally just dropping. Because actually American is easier than British, because in British English you have to accentuate. You have to accentuate the words when you're speaking. So basically it's a bit harder to speak than to speak like this. So yeah. It was an easy transition, but sometimes actually the hardest point for me is actually when I go back, because I speak Portuguese, Spanish, and French as well. French not as much, but sometimes it's so hard because of the grammar. My brain cannot switch, and I was like, it is what it is. But I through the years I've learned to just be okay with it.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I grew up here and took Spanish in high school, and I never got great at it, but I learned some. And then I lived in Italy for a year, so I studied Italian and learned that just about enough to get by. And then when I came back, the Italian and the Spanish are a total blend in my head, and I can't do either one.
Yeah, no, I get it actually, because and to me, I honestly, I normally say cannot take any credit for learning Spanish because I learned it by watching cartoons when I was a kid. So,
The best way to learn.
Exactly. So I didn't even notice I was learning it. But because everything comes from the same base, your brain sometimes, and it's funny because some words in French, for instance, the word strawberry, it's fraise. And its Spanish is fresa. In Portuguese is morango. So, it has nothing to do with, but thinking, oh yeah, hang on. Like, I remember it was the Spanish. It was similar to Spanish. So then I remember, like, that's how I do the connection. So I can totally imagine when you're like, which one is it? From Italian to Spanish, just become a mush.
It does. It does for me anyway. So in America, most of us only really speak one language. And so you are basically having to adapt to us for the most part. When you first came here or when you first went to London, what were some of the biggest challenges in speaking to people who are not fluent in multiple languages and are not used to people who aren't native speakers?
Well, in London itself, I didn't really have any trouble because everyone is just primed to know that people are, not natives. But I do have that trouble when I'm going back to France because my father-in-law and my mother-in-law, they actually don't speak any other language other than French. And so I do struggle there. I have to remind them they can't talk in slang with me, or I have to ask them 3 or 4 times, like, okay, say it in another way. And they say it just the same thing and louder. And I'm like, let's try again. But I feel that in America, I had no troubles at all because I feel like the idea of, everyone is an immigrant somehow. And in Dallas is very multicultural as well. So I felt like maybe I was the one that was just, harder on myself than anyone else. So I think I don't think I had any trouble, but I think that definitely when you're dealing with people like my parents-in-law, I definitely have to tell them to just go, I know I had good accent, but just remember, I have no idea what you just said. Just talk to me like a 5-year-old. So that is always funny. Yeah, for sure.
Talk to me like a 5-year-old is good advice for just about anyone at any time.
100%. And actually, I find myself always breaking down concepts. I never talk about, especially in podcasting, I never talk to anyone in, slang or like really complex terms because I'm like, I don't want to be that person who's making the other person feel bad. So if I gauge that they have an awareness about podcasting, and they know the terms, sure, I use them, but I don't assume because I think that it can make someone feel really like, I don't know, some people just don't have that confidence to say, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you're saying. I can't follow. Can you explain that in a different way? So I might as well just try and explain it, simply put, just layman's terms. So that's easier, I think.
So how often do you have to ask someone what they mean? And how often do people ask you what you mean?
Oh my gosh, it's really funny. In the beginning, when I moved to the US, I had a lot of British slang. So I would say, like a sweater here in the US, in the UK is a jumper. And so I would get these like what I call the 1,000-mile stare where someone is staring at you, but it's kind of like not really looking at you. And I was like, okay, hang on. It must be another word. And then I was like, a fluffy thing, or like, oh, wait, it's a sweater. So I probably, I don't know, it doesn't happen very often, but especially because I'm a creative and I think in just sometimes non-linear thinking, people are just like, I'm not following because you're throwing a lot of big ideas at me. And I'm like, okay, let's like take it slower. But I would say probably, I don't know. I think probably I ask more like, okay, what does that mean? It's more about actual cultural references that I have to ask people like, hey, give me more context. I'm like, I'm not from here. What does that mean? Or who's that person? But in terms of, professional terms, I don't think that happens very frequently because people have that built-in self-awareness when they're coming to me as clients. They already know that I'm not from here, so they are self-aware in that sense. And I have that kind of caution when I'm talking to people, when I'm thinking, okay, let's, like, this is something that it's very, common in the UK or in whatever. Do you guys do this here? So really prefacing by giving a lot of context really helps those moments of just kind of like, what are they talking about?
That is great practice. And everyone should have more of it, I think. I was married to someone from another country, and I found that I didn't understand the language, but I also didn't understand a lot of the cultural references and just some of the habits of speech. So they would ask you if you wanted something, and if you said no, they'd ask you again. And if you said no, they'd ask you a third time to make sure you really didn't want it. And
Yes.
it was, for me, we never did that in my family growing up. So it was frustrating to me, and then we came to understand the differences. So how often, this was a question I had, how often is a difficulty in the language itself, and how often is it a cultural reference or standard?
I wouldn't say it's frequent, honestly. I think most people, especially I've lived here since 2016, so there's a lot that I just don't ask about. But in professional settings, I feel like I'm pretty good at just kind of being aware, because for instance, Portuguese people are very direct, very to the point, and they'll probably tell you 7 things they don't like about what you did, and maybe under their breath tell you one thing that they liked, or maybe they don't even tell you because it's your job to do it right. The UK people do a lot of they beat around the bush, right? So they'll go around and don't really tell you, and 20 minutes later eventually they tell you that they didn't like something. And I feel that Americans are very straightforward but very compassionate, but they're also y'all are very positive. You start with like, oh my gosh, this is so great, and then you go eventually moving into the what isn't great. So I feel that that's something that I pay a lot of attention to. I just like the body language, and just again, communication is half of it is what you say and half of it is what you're not saying, right? And the combination, like, I'm getting mixed signals here, and I'm sure you know a lot about that. Reading audiences and reading people, right?
Yeah, I know some about it. I know more than I used to anyway. But I've found there's a very big difference, amongst Americans about how much they will couch something and kind of tell you criticism, but make it really, really soft. And I'm more of a direct person. Mm-hmm. So when they're saying that, it's been hard for me to understand what they really mean, because they're couching it so much. And when I say what I think, they think I'm just being mean because I'm just saying it.
Yeah. And to be honest, I'm living in the southern part of America. So basically people here are just nice and kind of soft and try to pat it. Yeah. Whereas I feel like the northern states are very just like, let's be to the point. Let's just say it how it is and move on and be effective and efficient. So I feel like there's also that part. Even though I work with people from all around the US, my primary client base and my friends are based here. So I feel like I default to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I live in Rhode Island, which is between Boston and New York City, and people are much more direct.
Yes, which to be honest, there's benefits to both. It just depends what type of person you are. And I definitely, when I came to America, oh my gosh, this is one of the things that will be etched in my brain forever. I remember moving from London. Again, it's not as hardcore as New York, but people are busy, and I still have amazing stories, but one time I'm walking here in a very walkable part of town, which Dallas isn't at all. And so this lady is driving by, we're crossing, my husband and I, and then she's this beautiful black woman, beautiful hair, tiny, tiny car. She gets her head out and she goes, oh my gosh, girl, you look so damn cute. And then she just goes and drives off. And I was like, what happened? This is amazing. I feel so great. That lady made my day. And there's so much about it that here, especially here in Dallas, that happens a lot. And I think it's just so wonderful that I'm like, whenever I go to Portugal, I make an effort, because you think it, but you don't say it. And so much of our communication is, we're in our head. I'm like, I'm going to make that lady's day. Maybe her day was trash today, and I'm just going to say something nice, and it's going to change her day. Because if I'm thinking that she's cute, why not say it? And I feel like that has been such an important part of also like who I am as a professional. If I see a competitor do something that I think is amazing, I will go and tell them how great that idea is or how much I appreciate them just out of the blue. And that makes so much of a difference in people's lives, and it has a ripple effect so much that we have no idea about. So I think that's such a nice thing to just incorporate in your day. If I'm thinking it, if it's nice, let me say it to the person, because maybe they really needed it.
Yeah, you never know. And you talked earlier about making the world a better place, and that's part of my mission in life too, but I don't usually do it with any grand gestures. It's normally just little things, just helping someone feel a little bit better about themselves, and then they're going to pass that on, and it goes a long way. The ripple effects keep going.
Yeah, exactly. Because again, the people who are mean, who don't care about everyone else, like they're so loud, and I feel like it can give the impression that nothing good in the world is ever happening. And, just making an effort of doing the thing, but also looking for the good, it's a really good exercise. Because if you're just focusing on, like everything sucks and everything, okay, can I correct? Well, I know that I don't think these words is this a professional podcast? I'm sorry, bleep. No, but the world really, a lot of people look around them and think, where's the bad? But if you start thinking, let's focus on the good, like it really changes the chemistry in your brain. And it's like really, a lot of people say this, but it's true. Like it can help you become a better professional, a better person, a better friend, a better mentor. So give it a go today.
And that's why I watch almost no news, because there's very little I can do about it, and it makes me less happy than I was before.
Yeah, that's true. Especially like the people who listen to a recycling of the same thing. It's just like, okay, what happened in the world? Let's go. Done. Informed. Next, on to the next thing.
So since we were talking about communication, I'm noticing from watching that I basically sit still. You never see my hands. I have a resting neutral expression on my face, and I talk in a little bit of a monotone compared to watching you use your hands and move around and be so expressive. Is that something that you've always done, or is that something that you've picked up and developed?
No, that's definitely something that is very, very me. There are a few things that I do. So for example, I'm not even looking at you. I'm looking at the camera. I'm spending 90% of this interview looking at one camera, because for those watching us, for you interviewing me, I want to make sure that you see me looking at you. And I'm making air quotes right now, because it's so, so important, right? To be looking, because if I'm looking down, it's where you are. This is really weird, right? But if your camera is slightly up, there's like always like an in-between you can look. But to me, I'm always aware that, an in-person interview is, somewhere where you don't have to be, I wouldn't say as dramatic, but I worked in TV. And so one of the things that they tell you is some things fall flat, other things are really, really augmented. So you want to make sure that if you're moving your hands, you're not moving your hands constantly and all over the screen, because that's very dramatic. But if you have them like lower to where you are, it creates some sort of movement that keeps people's attention on the screen. So all of this is just by nature, by now, it's just kind of automatic, but definitely something that I'm very expressive. Also like I have the worst poker face ever. I'm like, I try to hold it. So, which is great if people are telling me something exciting, they can tell right away that I'm also excited. But if I'm thinking, they can tell like what's wrong, and I'm like, nothing. I'm processing what you just said. But yeah, I think that so much of our communication is making sure that we are ourselves, I guess, authentically ourselves, but we're just being mindful of like some potential, I don't know, exaggeration. So for instance, I move a lot, but I actually move my hands a lot. And I sometimes, many years ago, I used to hit the microphone. So I have to I train myself to not move as much, still move, but to be careful, because that could be impacting all the things around, especially if you have like a big mic arm, like you have to maybe have your hands low, because obviously like maybe you just like boop, hit the mic, and nobody wants that.
No one does. All right, Anna, we are going to start wrapping up in a little bit, but before I start asking you my 3 standard questions, are there any other things that you would like to ask me or that you think the audience should know?
Oh, okay. Yes, I would love to know.
Great.
What has been, not necessarily, so especially as we're doing a podcast, as I am a podcast expert, what would you say has been the highlight of doing the show versus doing your job? Because you have a public facing job. But like, what has been the difference being quote unquote hiding behind a camera or a microphone and talking to a ton of people and then being present? Because I feel like they have a different impact on you.
So I'm not sure I understood the question
I asked
exactly.
2 questions. Okay, so basically,
good. So
yeah,
I'll ask...
right. I love doing this. It's just like, oh, this is one good idea, and then I finish another way. So what would you say is the most kind of like the proudest moment of your podcasting journey, and then how has it? In comparison to being in a public space and doing it behind a camera, like how have you shifted your mindset about like what you do?
Got it. One of the most rewarding things is getting guests like you. So people that you've heard speaking or that you admire, or, someone who's just impressive, and you get them to come on your show and you get to talk to them. It's awesome. Like when I get I'm like, yes, I got that person on my show. So I love that. And I guess the big difference is, most of the time I'm dealing with people directly. So I know the impact I'm having. I know what they're getting, what they're not getting, and how it's affecting them. With this, I kind of am doing it, and then I try to get people's feedback, but it's tough to get feedback. So I'm hoping it's well received, but I can't tell for sure.
All right. And for the listener and for the viewer, this is your time to go and actually send Jeremy a message saying, Jeremy, I appreciate you because blank. Because I feel like that's something that I hear all the time. We only get to see about like 10% of the impact that we make as podcasters. So, and it's so random. I am really good at posting on social media things that are, inspirational and blah, blah, blah. And the most random thing, I went on the weekend to a really, let's just say creative art exhibition. And they had really weird art. So I was like, you know what? This is so odd. I'm going to use some of these images to just talk about podcasting and how weird you can be on your podcast. And there's still people who will appreciate you, just like this art that is super weird. And someone's like, oh my God, this is my jam. And a lot of people who never engaged with my content engaged there. They're like laughing and like, oh gosh, like that was a really good point. And I was like, okay, like what gets people's attention and how they feel compelled to respond is always so weird. So that's one of the things that I noticed with podcasting is that people can, and I tell all the time to my clients when they're like, I don't know if anyone is listening. And I'm like, all right, how many people or how many podcasts did you listen to this week? And they go, maybe 4 or 5. And I'm like, okay, how many times did you email the host to tell them how much you enjoy the show? And they're like, none. And I'm like, all right, there you go. That's your answer. And then I was like, homework, go home and send them a message. But, like that's something that's definitely something that happens. But yeah, I can see like it's frustrating because you're creating all of this content. Like, did it resonate? Did people appreciate it? So yeah, I hear you on that one. All right.
I like your comment about being willing to be weird, because I teach this when I'm talking to people about storytelling. And I'm trying to get them to tell real stories about themselves. And they're like, but I'm going to look kind of weird. I'm like, everyone's weird. We're all weird. That's the whole point of this podcast. Everyone's weird. And if they look at you and say, you're weird, they're going to like it because they are too. So
yes,
I think it's always okay.
Exactly. And when someone is what we say vanilla, like if someone has nothing special about them, you're kind of like not even drawn to them. But even
Right.
if you disagree with that weird thing that person really loves, you're like, that is interesting. I'm going to remember you.
Yeah.
Or at least you give them a reason to talk about that thing. So I agree. That's something like just be your, like the weirdos self, like, because nobody will remember you if you're just trying to be too PC in all the stages, in all the levels, in all the interactions. So I totally agree with you.
Nice. All right. Well, in the interest of time, we need to wrap up. So My three standard questions, and this one has part A and B. What is a place you have loved to travel to, and what's a place you would love to go that haven't been yet?
Okay, so I want to start before I forget. I want to go to Japan. Everyone in my circle of friends seems to want to go to Japan, been to Japan, and we have friends there. So I was like, I totally want to go there. And it's just one of those places that is culturally so different. Architecture, I love interior design. I love architecture, and so just beauty in just naturally through nature, but also the architecture that they have, which is just incredible and a lot more just in sync with nature. So definitely that. Places where I've loved being. I would say probably, I really love, it's going to be cliche, but Paris. I really love Paris. I've been there before a couple of times, but it's just one of those places that, because architecture, I just love it so much that I'm like, it's just so beautiful. And I just love the French language. So I'm like, oh, oui, un baguette, merci. I just like, oh, okay, music to my ears. So yeah, that for sure.
That's funny. And it's great going to a place where you already know people that can show you the real culture. So Japan sounds like it's going to be a good one.
Super pumped.
Question 2 is, who is someone who you think is a great communicator, either in your personal life or a public figure?
Oh, wow. Great communicator. I should have prepared for this. Well, I love my friend Nic Redmon. She is a vocal coach. She teaches vocal health and how to be your authentic you. And she's as weird as me. She's a comic too. So basically, it's like the best combination, and she can really explain everything voice related. She has like even a master's degree in just all of these like technical terms voice wise, but she will talk to you in such a way that you're like, totally, that makes sense. Contract my belly to activate the blah blah blah. Yes, let's do it. Yeah, like I think she is one of the most excellent people. Just, and for whatever reason, Dolly Parton, I love her. She's amazing too. I mean, that lady, what isn't she doing? How can't she not communicate what a better human being to be than just like look at her and see all the things she's done through the years? So for sure, her.
Nice. So did I just hear you say you're a comedian?
No, I'm not. Nick is.
Okay.
I throw some random jokes, but I do not see myself as a comedian. No. I imagine that the way I said it, it kind of sounded like, no.
I was just checking because one of the questions I didn't ask was how long it took you to get English humor. Because from what I understand, once you get humor is when you really understand a language.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, you know what? To me, it felt when I was on the bus on one of those double deckers in London, and I was just like thinking, and I was listening to BBC Radio 1. I still remember. I was listening to it, and I was like, oh, I was just thinking in English, not in Portuguese anymore. Nice. And I was like, new level unlocked for sure. That to me was that. Yeah, but I see your humor when you're like, haha, I saw what you did there. The puns are, to me, I wish I did better puns because I think they're amazing.
Alrighty. Last question is, what is one piece of communication advice you think everyone can benefit from?
Dramatic pause.
Well done.
I think really, and this is going to be, I'm all cliches today. I don't know what's up, but really just do it imperfectly. Really go for it. Like the kind of the motto of my podcast is create imperfect content that moves you forward. And that is true because we get so much in our head into, oh, I want to be, at a level of really performing at a high level. And we kind of forget, like in general, like hobbies and work, anything. And we forget that we have to be terrible at something on the way up. And it's really, really is about the journey and what we learn and the memories and the stories we make along the way. Because once you're there, you're like, what's the next thing? So it never feels like you're really there making it. So just like really enjoy the process and just know that it's going to be imperfect and people will resonate with whatever you do that isn't great.
One of my favorite sayings is, if something's worth doing, it's worth doing poorly. And it makes everyone stop. They're like, what do you mean? You're supposed to do everything great. I'm like, no, if you wait till you're great at it, you're never going to do anything. So if it's worth doing, it's worth doing poorly. at least at first, and then hopefully you get better.
I mean, you will get better unless you choose to not get better, because there's no way you're going to be doing something for like a long period of time and not improve in some fraction of, like that whole process. So I love that. I may steal that. Jeremy. Sorry.
You can, I'm giving it to you. You don't need to steal it.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Anna, it's been a pleasure having you here today. Can you tell the audience where the best way to reach out to you is?
Yes. So, of course, first off, subscribe to the podcast space on any podcast platform, obviously, because what you're getting here is what I am as a host. And just yesterday, I had someone who was like, Anna, I'm meeting you for the first time. I've been following you for so long. I'm fangirling. And I'm like, girl, I am a regular person. So if you want to reach out to me on Instagram. I'm at ThePodcastSpace, THE, and then podcast singular in space. I would love to talk to people. I love hearing people's ahas and wins. So for sure that, but anything, obviously the website is thepodcastspace.com. So they can go just there and talk to me there.
Wonderful. Anna, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeremy, for having me.
Thanks for listening to another episode of How to Talk to Weirdos. Hopefully you found it both interesting and useful. If either of those things is true, please share. Do you have a friend or a coworker who could benefit from listening? Maybe a family member you're going to be spending the holidays with? Please send them a link to your favorite episode and see if your conversations don't get just a little bit easier. I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much and have a great week.